Hello and welcome to this week's episode of The Wire Wrap, our weekly show where we discuss important developments as we go into the Lok Sabha polls and the end of it now. With me today I have Nakul Singh Sawhney. He's an independent documentary filmmaker and also the founder of Chal Chitra Abhiyan. Thank you for joining us, Nakul.
Thank you.
And Seema, Chishti, the editor of The Wire. Excited to have you both here today. I wanted to start off today's show by talking about what's happening in Uttar Pradesh. Now, this is the state that sends the highest number of MPs to the Lok Sabha at 80. The BJP has said, some of its leaders have said this year that they are confident of winning all 80 of the seats. The India Alliance has reacted to this with Akhilesh Yadav saying that they are going to win 79 seats and they're in competition for the last one, not to be left behind. In the 2019 elections, the National Democratic Alliance had won 64 seats. Of these, 62 had gone to the BJP alone. But the landscape is a bit different this time. Last time the Samajwadi Party and the Bahujan Samaj Party were in an alliance. The Congress fought on its own and the BJP had some smaller local parties in its NDA. This time the India Alliance has formed, the Samajwadi Party and the Congress are fighting together. The BSP is on its own and the NDA continues as it was. I wanted to ask you, you've both been travelling in Uttar Pradesh during these elections. You've visited multiple constituencies. Beyond this political rhetoric of sabko 80 mil rahe hain, what is happening on the ground? We've seen multiple reports of there being some anger about certain schemes, the unemployment, the Agniveer scheme, the lack of recruitments, these being issues that have come out in multiple reports we've seen. But there have also been others that say the Prime Minister is still popular. There are people who are very staunchly behind the Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister, Adityanath. So I wanted to get your sense of what's happening there. Nakul, would you like to start?
Just to add to what you were saying about the alliances and how they've changed this time, another significant party in West UP, RLD, is also then at the last minute switched to the NDA. So that actually, at one level, after that happened, at least in the first two phases, when Jayant ji did actually switch to the NDA, there was a lot of despondency in the opposition camp. But I think as we sort of got closer to the elections, one of the things that became very evident was that there was no wave this time. And the elections had become very localized. To the extent that there was a joke going on by the fourth or the fifth phase ki ye Lok Sabha chunav hai, Vidhan Sabha chunav hai, Zilla Panchayat ka chunav hai. Because a lot of the issues that were being raised were actually hyper-local to the extent that in some places people were even showing us ki bhai, the drainage in our village hasn't been sorted, and look at how the entire sort of square here gets so clogged, we can't walk during the monsoons. So some of these very hyper local issues were also being raised in our conversations. At the same time, I think what began to happen is that because it wasn't a wave election, the local candidates began to play a very significant role. And so West UP, to start with, is historically, it's not been, at least say till even a decade back, it's not been the stronghold of either the BJP or the SP. Organizationally, it was always BSP or RLD which were competing over here. But in the last 10 years, especially after the 2013 riots, we've seen a tectonic shift in West UP, where the BSP for a whole range of reasons is gradually disintegrated. RLD, a lot of their voters moved to the BJP, and because it was really a combination of Jat voters and Jat farmer voters and Muslim voters, and it was that combination that often brought them the seats that they got in West UP. But a lot of the Jat voters shifted to the BJP after the 2000 riots. Muslims moved away; they didn't want to vote with Jat, so many of them moved to the SP. Now, actually, what's very interesting is that, I mean, there's a little joke that in the 2020-21 farmers movement, it was the people that fought the BJP, and people in West UP as well fought the BJP, literally snatched the party RLD from the BJP's hand, handed it over on a platter to Jayant Chaudhary, and he very politely handed it back to the BJP. So but in spite of that, you see, what's very interesting now is that you will see, say for example, Kairana Lok Sabha, right, which went to poll in the first phase, and there was a lot of anti-incumbency against the BJP candidate Pradeep Chaudhary, who's the current MP as well. Now, and Ikra Hassan is this is a young, she also comes from a very powerful political legacy and a political family, but it was a family political legacy that was gradually sort of waning away. But Ikra revives that in a very big way. And what's very fascinating is that the fact that she's a Muslim candidate wasn't really a factor on the ground. So that's the extent to which you will see the reversal of polarization. Factors like the Kisan Andolan continue to play a big role. In West UP, one of the things that you'll also see is that in the last 10 years, you've seen massive Dalit movements, very powerful Dalit movements, and very powerful Kisan Andolans. And both of them playing a very significant role in this election. Both of them sort of finding, almost consolidating into votes here. So, I can say this very safely for, say, Kairana, Muzaffarnagar, even Saharanpur, where a lot of Dalit votes have even shifted this time to the SP candidates. In a constituency like Kairana, the lowest voting turnouts have been in Jat majority villages and Jat dominated villages because, and if you do a boot to boot sort of breakdown of the voting percentages, like I said, the lowest voting has been in Jat dominated villages because a lot of people, a lot of Jat farmers who've been literally fighting the BJP on a day-to-day basis for the last 4 or 5 years are now suddenly expected to vote for the BJP. So many of them said कि भाई चौधरी साहब के खिलाफ तो जा नहीं सकते लेकिन भाजपा पे वोट नहीं गिरी जागी. So many of them just decided to sit at home. And the ones who did come out and vote, at least the reports we've got, there is a significant number that's also voted for Ikra, right? So even on a seat, say Ghaziabad, right? Ghaziabad, which went to poll in the second phase, which is considered almost like a safe, a done deal for the BJP. मतलब मजाक वहाँ होता है कि if you get a BJP ticket, you're pretty much getting a gate pass to the parliament. So, but even on that seat, because of the Rajput angle, now this has been a seat where Rajput candidates have been winning for very long. VM Singh before that, and before that Rajnath Singh. This time they switched and they gave it to Abaniya, Atul Garg, right? And Atul Garg, yeah. And there's about almost 5 lakh Rajput voters in that constituency, and we went to Rajput villages over there. They were livid. So again, among the lowest voting percentages, both in Muzaffarnagar Lok Sabha and in Ghaziabad Lok Sabha, were both among Rajputs. Hardcore BJP voters were not stepping out to vote. Now, I think these factors, so even a seat like Ghaziabad, which the BJP may win in the end, but I think even that seat, which they won by about a margin of 5 lakh votes last time, they will be won by under, say, 50,000, under a lakh, right? Under a lakh, which in itself is a huge achievement by the, and the other very significant factor, which, I mean, eventually when we talk about East UP as well, but even in West UP, where, I mean, the dominant OBCs in West UP are not the Yadavs, it's Jats and Gujars, right? So even the non sort of Jat, Gujar OBCs, this is a shift that we've seen in East UP also, where the non-Yadav OBCs in varying numbers are definitely breaking from the BJP. But even here, castes that are considered hardcore BJP voters, numerically significant castes like the Sainis, have at least on 3 constituencies, I can say safely, Kairana, Muzaffarnagar, Saharanpur and Bijnor, where there was a Saini candidate, Deepak Saini from the SP, there's a significant shift among Saini voters this time. In Muzaffarnagar, where the BSP fielded a Prajapati candidate or a Kumhar caste candidate, Dara Singh Prajapati, it's actually, there are about 60 to 70,000 Prajapati voters in that constituency. We could see a significant shift towards the BSP, right? And Kumhars who are considered to be BJP voters. In fact, the joke was that a lot of Dalit activists from the BSP were saying that, this is the first time Kumhars are calling us and saying, let's vote BSP. So.
Yeah, so may I just come in here a bit? Yeah. So I think a couple of key points which I think sort of define the mood across UP was the 2 things that you mentioned flowing from that. One is, of course, that while it would be tempting to say this is a waveless election, that's not the sense I got. Because partly all of us analysts and those visiting UP and not staying there are kind of hemmed in by our memories of 2019. So if that's the baseline, then, what movement is it possible? It's like visiting constituencies after 84 without looking at what's happened between 84 and 89. So I see 2 very significant things that have probably played out in UP. Of course, the numbers the Election Commission will have to count. One is the repudiation of the issues which the centre has tried to push. So they've tried to centralize everything. They just vote for Modi, I'll fix everything. That has not worked. And I think this response about making it about drainage, about making it about their lives, this whole desire to cap aspiration and say that, we'll just give you rations and that's it. There was clearly people talking about it without reporters having to prompt people. And number two, what you said, those social openings that have come across communities. There's a lot of like conversation happening across communities, which we thought had been permanently reconfigured as the BJP at that time had broken the social mosaic and reconfigured the pieces. It seems as if those tectonic plates are shifting again and there's a reconfiguration. I don't know if it will stop here or is this kind of part of another process which will take some time from happening. But the social engineering, everything that we've taken as a given, that Mr. Modi is an OBC Prime Minister, he's sorted this, you know. So now this whole new India is going to be this Mandal Kamandal kind of marriage, which is, that's not happening. So I think we're looking at a new kind of social justice formulation with a very strong economic backdrop, which forms the kernel of dissent, if you like, or the anti-BJP sentiment. That is what I could see across communities, across genders. We've heard a lot about how women are voting, and I'm sure a lot of women are voting as they vote. But I think women are also voting as per their economic conditions. They are angry. A lot of them told me कि सबका बच्चा घर पे बैठा है, the kids don't have employment, the gas cylinder, they say we got one free, great, but by now we have to pay 1,300, 1,200 for a gas cylinder. That's not working. So I think a lot of the shibboleths, whether it's of a polarized electorate, over-centralized stuff happening from Mr. Modi and those abuses, I don't think have gone down very well. So when the votes are counted, we may be looking at a wave. Maybe we can't see it right now, but something's on.
There's an undercurrent for sure.
There's clearly an undercurrent. You know, whether while coming from Indonesia to the shores of the Bay of Bengal, on India's east coast, what shape it takes, we don't know. But there clearly is something's afoot.
And just in that context, do you think the narrative Akhilesh Yadav has been using of bringing together PDA groups is something that has gained ground?
Yeah, I think what would you say, Nakul? I mean, I would say it is because he says it is. And I read a very interesting interview by him because it's Pichhada, Dalit and Alpsankyak. Then he's changed it, and A could also means ki, agadi, and it also means aurat.
Garib agadi.
Garib agadi and aurat. So he's really looking at what was earlier a classic kind of a Congress kind of a umbrella without those exact people, but across the social spectrum to push it beyond a my party, Muslim Yadav party, and this is something which on the 3rd of March at the Patna India rally that Mr. Tejasvi Yadav also said clearly that we are a My Baap party. We are MY and BAAP, that stands for several other sections of society which we're bringing together. So it's like, I think this is a very comprehensive social challenge that is meeting Mr. Modi's drive to be this singular kind of monarch, king running his Ashwamedha Ghoda across, the horse is running across India, please conquer and come. The horse is being stopped at several points and questions are being asked of it.
I agree. I think there's the Modi image has certainly taken a dent. This time you can see that, right? And just to add to what you were saying, because in 2022 as well, one sensed anger on certain issues like Avara Pashu, which is basically stray cattle because of the sort of restrictions on slaughters and slaughterhouses. There's now, it's a massive menace in UP because they just don't know how to control it. They've been trying to create cow sheds, but with the level of corruption at every level, even those cow sheds are a big failure. And actually in West UP, while it is a menace, but in West UP they're growing sugarcane in at least, in parts of West UP. So there's only so much damage they can do there. But as you move towards central and east, it's grain, right? And it's vegetables and, they just completely destroy those fields. It was an issue in 2022. Unemployment was an issue in 22. Inflation was an issue in 22, but there was this sense of giving them another chance. It wasn't necessarily translating into votes to the extent that one thought it would. This time, the anger, because I remember in 22, a lot of people would say, yes, there is this issue, but we're going to vote for Yogi again. He's improved law and order, and so on and so forth, right? This time, the anger was palpable. And this time, there was a people very clearly saying that we're not voting for them this time.
It didn't come with that but.
It didn't come with a but. It didn't come, exactly. And I think what was the sort of final nail in the coffin was this, that Yogi, Chief Minister Yogi had propagated, there's a lot of propaganda that had gone around the over 60,000 openings in police vacancies for UP police, right? Which was going to be a record-breaking number of vacancies that would be filled in one go, over 60,000, because there was a lot of anger about the fact that, government vacancies aren't being opened up with the frequency that they've seen in past governments. Over 25 lakh students applied for that. And that paper got leaked. after the exam. And so that was the final nail in the coffin. You know, that anger then just began to explode. So I think, yes, so because of which I think PDA, and like you said, that what is also coupled with this kind of social justice is a kind of narrative of economic justice, and those two, I think there is definitely a reflection of that in the on the ground.
Yeah, and I think I also got a whiff of the 2015 Bihar Vidhan Sabha election, which became forward backward. So very crucial, important aspects of your social identity, along with finding your economy thwarted completely. So there's no hope for my generation or for the one after me. So you're thwarting my social mobility, my progress, by destroying my economy, and we know that you're also Pandit Brahmin. So you want me to be a follower. Your social engineering means I give you my votes, but I don't get that genuine representation. So maybe it's a second stage of accommodating, if you like, what BJP likes to call accommodative politics of the other Hindu sections, the non-forwards in there, that now they want their fair share. They want representation. You know, Nishads want to have their candidates and to be counted literally.
And just to add to that, which is that I think this time Akhilesh, one of the most sensible things I think he's done in this election is that he's fielded only 5 Yadav candidates out of 80, and a lot of other seats have gone to EBC and Dalit candidates, to the extent that on 2 seats, Meerut and Faizabad, or these are general seats where he's given the ticket to scheduled caste candidates. So that has also sort of it's been received very well, right? And there is, so in that sense, but at the same time, just sort of a caveat I want to add too, which is that BJP continues to have a very strong organization, and an organization across castes. You know, yes, it is true, which is something that we at least experienced, is that that the local cadre, especially among non-Yadav OBCs and Dalits, would have a lot more influence locally. This time it seemed that people weren't willing to listen to that local cadre of the BJP. Secondly, at least according to CSD's Lokniti reports of the 22 elections, they've said that significantly the number of women voters, or the percentage of women voters, is significantly higher than male voters. So that's another caveat that we, at least the CCA team, Chal Chitra Abhiyan team, we were not able to speak with as many women. So Seema, you might want to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm very anecdotal. I haven't spoke to that many women, but I made it a point to go out because I was intrigued by this and anxious to know. I found them combative. I found them competitive. Groups of women would not all agree. There was, because of mehengai, I think inflation, joblessness is something that maybe women experience firsthand in a way that they didn't earlier. So I found them pretty much in line with the other moods. So they may be more in number, but I don't know if they're going to go in divergent things. But to just add to the caveats, ever since the Ram Mandir movement and all in UP, they've had a very solid kind of 20%, then 30%. So even at a time when they get 9 or 10 seats, which is what they got in 2009, when the Congress hits its peak, the vote share kind of was not dented. So it's a bit like Delhi, that the vote share stays the same broadly, and it's a thick, good vote share. To the extent that that'll get dented remains to be seen. But because demographically UP is divided in such a way that you could have a much higher vote share, like the BJP had in 2019. They had 49.6%, which was higher than what they had in 2014, but they got 10 seats fewer. So it depends on how that plays out in particular constituencies.
I want to use this to segue into our second topic for the day, and it's something both of you have hinted at, which is the way that these campaigns have been run before this election. Now, on Saturday, that's the 1st of June, the last 7th phase of voting takes place in what has been a really long election in our peak heat summer. And then a few days after that, on the 4th of June, we have the results. So I think now we're already in the 48-hour silence period before the last phase. All campaigning is over. So I think now is a good time to take stock of what really has gone on in the last several months and what this says about the kind of politics India is seeing today. I think you both mentioned how centralized the BJP's campaign was. It was Narendra Modi's face everywhere, including on the manifesto, which was all about Modi ki guarantee. And also starting from January, when the Ram Temple inauguration happened, we could see that was going to play quite a large role in the way they were going to portray themselves before these elections. But sometimes in the last few weeks, it has seemed like Modi himself appears to be wandering off his main plot a little bit. He's said some, I mean, of course, he has really heightened his communal narrative, but in ways that have sometimes sounded a bit like a joke, that if you have 2 buffaloes, the Congress will take one and give it to the Muslims. Or otherwise, he's accused Adani and Ambani of corruption, saying they send tempos of cash to places.
To the Congress very specifically.
Yeah, to the
and
Congress.
tempos
True.
of all vehicles. Anyway, sorry.
I like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, he said
He's clearly aware
that
of the state of the railways and airways.
he said that he himself is divine and his origins are not biological.
वो तो सच है.
And opposition parties have attempted to not only focus on what they say the BJP government hasn't achieved in the last 10 years, but come up with promises that they say will provide a cushion for the economic crisis that the country has seen. So Nakul, from a zoomed out perspective, what do you think these campaigns say about today's politics in India?
I mean, you know, like you said that he suddenly went off track after
Yeah.
the first phase, right? So it was actually after the first phase where they realized that they've not gotten off to that blazing start that they were expecting. At least in UP especially, I mean, and there was campaigns in other parts of, I mean, there were elections in other parts of the country, but I think UP, the first 2 phases with RLD switch, they thought it's going to be cakewalk, right? And
That's also when the 400 par narrative sort of disappeared.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. After the first phase, and you see him change his tone, his tempo. He sounds, I mean, this is the first time I've seen him sounding rattled in so many years, right? And it became absurd to a point where WhatsApp University became, I mean, the nonsense of WhatsApp University actually became part of his speeches. He's never stooped to that level.
Yes.
So that came as a little bit of a shock, and you know, whatever be your political opinions, whatever be your ideological leanings, but the fact is that in a democracy, whether you like the party or not, whether you like the Prime Minister, but he is everyone's Prime Minister. So it is very distressing finally to hear your Prime Minister speak that language. Mangal Sutra आपके मुसलमानों को चले जाएंगे and so on, and so it at that level, yes, I think it speaks volumes of where the political discourse has, how low it has fallen, and I'm hoping this is the lowest point, you know, and we'll only rise from here. And I'm hoping it can't go any lower than this, you know, because this is nonsense that you would hear the average Gaurakshak or Bajrang Dal cadre saying on the ground. But, you know, this coming from the Prime Minister is very distressing. Secondly, I think also in terms of campaigns, I just want to say one thing about this election. And I can say this about, I can safely say this about West UP, but I'm saying this about other parts of the country as well. Because like I said, traditionally the SP doesn't have an organizational base in West UP, right? But yet there are very close fights on even safe seats of the BJP. I think this is an election that has been fought by the people more than political parties. And there's something fascinating about that, you know, because in the first 2-3 phases, I mean, I'll give you another example. Like I said, we've seen massive Dalit movements in these parts, we've seen massive farmers' movements. And it's really that sentiment which is playing out in these elections. Of course, a lot of credit goes to the local candidates also. They've also put in a lot of effort. Till actually, had the India Alliance been able to get its act together at least 6 months before the elections, had they got their sort of, you know, the seat sharing, they would have finalized their seat sharing, they would have finalized at least, you know, they would have had some sort of a broad agenda, if not a very clear manifesto, but a broad agenda. It was only by the 3rd or the 4th phase that you get a sense of what the India Alliance is even promising to the people in terms of 2nd or 3rd. So it's really in that sense, it was fascinating. What we saw in some parts is it was really people's anger which was manifesting itself, and it has manifested itself in other movements in the past.
Yeah.
And you know, surprisingly, you suddenly see massive Rajput panchayats being held in West UP, and you see that anger all the way till parts of East UP at least. But those massive Rajput panchayats being held against the BJP, and I mean, you know, one can find whatever, there are many reasons that were stated for the panchayats, but I also feel that you'll see this anger among, there were Tyagi panchayats held against the BJP, there were Rajput and Gujars, right? all agrarian castes and dominant agrarian castes. And this is also, while there are local social cultural issues that one thinks, that at least on the basis of which these panchayats were held, but I think there's also this underlying agrarian crisis of employment, which has finally manifested itself in all of this, you know.
So I'd just like to say that, as he said, the deeply centralized campaign, Mr. Modi's name featuring 67 times in the manifesto, everything being Modi ki guarantee, kicking the BJP off that ground. And number two is the amount of resources the BJP had to spend. That's really significant. So when we think of all the resource crunching moves that were taken, whether it's electoral bonds, chasing up people who are, this whole tempo is what? It comes from Mr. Modi's anxiety that maybe the opposition has access to some resources because he cannot stand that access coming out, because the accounts of the Congress have been frozen before that. Certain other parties also had IT questions raised in the middle of it. ED raids happening, parties being split, and parties of his own, of the BJP supporters being split. Absolutely. Whether it is Mr. Paswan's party, like what happened last time, the difference between last time and now, and what we saw in Maharashtra happening. So, or pulling away Nitish Kumar. So, I think it was kind of a campaign where everything was sort of used in a very skewed way in terms of resources. Where I think the opposition picked up the gauntlet and gathering fuel and momentum from what it saw was public anger. And as I said, it was the Janta Party, as in terms of the people fighting the election. And people tell you that, ki yahan to Janta chunav lad rahi, awam chunav lad rahi hai. You know, people are fighting the election. So, where they picked up from that was that they contested the BJP on its basic premises. They went for fundamental principled problems vis-a-vis their economics, vis-a-vis their issues on social justice. Rahul Gandhi going on about caste census, despite being told by several people in his own party that it's not okay to talk about it. And then, oh no, this caste census is up to no good, see you lost out in all the Hindi states, etc. He hammered on in that. That struck a chord. It allowed people to make connections, allowed people to make the connections which they were perhaps not being able to make so far. So I think in that thing, it really, they made the most of the little tools that they had at hand, and all the leaders kind of coming together on an India platform broadly. Sure, we could argue that it could have happened later, earlier, but with Nitish Kumar's departure, I think that was like a major, you know, he was one of the co-founders. His departure really like sort of, you know, threw the souffle up in the party room. So they had to, like, you know, go back to the bakery, as it were, and piece up things again. So I think that happened. So I think in terms of issues, those are the good things we've seen. And also one must congratulate Mr. Modi for this, for talking about the Congress manifesto. By trying to spread all these wretched lies and mistruths, the Congress party manifesto actually got record number of downloads, and people started talking about manifestos.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we've seen this much discussion around
on a manifesto.
Yeah.
So it became centered on manifesto. And also Mr. Modi, a writer, wrote in The Wire that, you know, he's talking about two buffaloes is the closest he's come to talking about the political economy and, you know, livelihood issues. So it just kind of drove attention in unintended ways to lives of people, and so it played out. But it's been an election which has been fought under extreme adversity. There is the heat which the Election Commission has not accounted for. There's deep distrust, institutional distrust of the Election Commission, central agencies, income tax department, and a highly centralized executive with just one face, and his face is plastered everywhere. Even when it's a G20, there's only a G1 face, just one poster around the country. So I think in terms of that, if India delivers anything other than 303 seats, it's a huge tribute to Indian democracy. I mean, we'll have to study how we got there, but it's against all odds. So absolutely, Mr. Modi cannot get up and say that democracy is alive. It's a mother of democracy, because everything has been done to kind of thwart its, root and branch, to throw out the traditions of democracy and to upend it. This changed the constitution thing. This has been said by BJP leaders. Four candidates. Not just that. On the 14th of August 2023, Mint carries an op-ed by the PMEAC, the Economic Advisory Committee of the Prime Minister. His direct appointee, Mr. Bibek Debroy, writes something saying amendments is not the way. That sets the tone, and then everybody's talking about it. What are we talking about? And then Arvind Panagaria comes up with a statement saying, don't worry about inequality. It doesn't matter. So we knew where Mr. Modi stands. And of course, in a recent one of those interviews, whereas somebody said that he's the one going about interviewing journalists, you know, he kind of, his whole position on equality was very disturbing. He says, Do you want everybody to be Garib? Well, that's not the idea about kind of bridging inequalities. And we know the whole Thatcherite kind of stream where that's coming from. In such an unequal and distressed country like India. So I hope that whatever may be the result of this election, there will be building bricks of dissent, of articulated proper agreement amongst groups which are actually national. A lot of these livelihood concerns, anxiety about Tanashahi, dictatorship, you can sense them across the country. You sense them in Tamil Nadu, you sense them in Kerala, you sense them across Maharashtra, this business of betrayal. So a lot of these pieces of what BJP thought was central to its politics, and it can use that to bully the Indian system and win a third term, received a repudiation. Now, whether that repudiation will be enough to kind of push the chariot out of the stable, we don't know. But clearly, the contest seems to have been a very sparkling and a robust one.
And just quickly adding one point, which is that, you know, this whole discourse around Tanashahi, you know, in places as far as East UP, where there is no Aam Aadmi Party organization, or even if it is, it's negligible. Right. Even in those places, people were talking about Kejriwal's arrest and were very critical of the arrest. You know, so that is something, that is a sense, the sense of dismantling democratic institutions has gone down very deep. There's a lot of talk about that. It's not just some sort of a seminar room discourse. Yeah. People are talking about that. And when people, you know, in the past you've had, they're called journalists, right? Arnab Goswami, what do we call them now? But, you know, people like them who in the past have said, if not Modi, then who? I think this time, and I agree with Seema, we don't know what the final results will be, but we have seen genuinely an election which is Modi versus the people of India. You know, so if not Modi, when people say that, if not Modi, then who? And, you know, opposition would sort of sheepishly say, you know, the people of India. But
now you can actually see 1.4 billion minus one.
You actually see that this time. This was actually an election by the people against an autocratic government.
Earlier this week, Payal Kapadia, she's a filmmaker, won a prize at the Cannes Film Festival and has been celebrated across the board, as she should be, for her film All That We Imagine as Light. She was a student at FTII Pune, and after she won this award, and, you know, politicians of all kinds were congratulating her and claiming this a victory, to be a victory of India, Rasool Pukati, who is an Oscar-winning sound artist, went public by saying that, you know, whatever she has achieved, mainstream Indian film industry has, and those who support it, have nothing to do with it. This is her victory, and then to claim it would be unfair. While Kapadia was at FTII, she was one of the people who'd protested in 2015 against the appointment of actor Gajendra Chauhan by the Modi regime as the director of that institute. And one of 35 students at FTII had named in an FIR for being disruptive during these protests. That case is still open. Nakul, you're also a filmmaker whose work has not always been seen kindly by those in power because of the important issues it raises. How do you see the role of dissent in art today, in ways that, and like Kapadia's recent victory has highlighted, you know, we can celebrate when it's abroad, but here, not so much.
I think Payal is, Payal's award is a vindication of sorts, and I think it's a massive embarrassment for the government. I mean, I'm an alumni of FTI myself, so I can tell you that one of the beautiful things about the institution was that it sort of, if there was one place in the country where you didn't have to worry about a censor certificate, it was FTI, right? Yeah. There were no sort of restrictions on, at least, well, creativity in the sense that, of course, you wouldn't probably be working with massive budgets or anything as students, but at least in terms of creativity, at least in terms of conceiving your films and whatever was possible in those budgets, there was no restriction on that by the administration. There was no thought policing, you know, which was extremely important. And so I think this is a very, very important vindication. And the problem is that suddenly you have the entire government congratulating her. And the same people, because let's not forget that FTII's protest against the appointment of Gajendra Chauhan as their chairman, that was the first major protest, student protest after the BJP came to power in 2014, right? So I think life pretty much comes a full circle. 10 years down the line, just before the election results, you know, this is a lovely vindication. This
Self has said, I'm so happy that I was chairman while she was a student.
Yeah. So this is natural justice of
sorts.
Kind
of absence of a sense of humor.
Exactly.
He's quite funny. Yeah.
So, I mean, where the role of art is concerned, whether it be this government or any other government, I really feel that, I mean, very often, you know, the kind of films we make, people often ask us, no, what is the solution? You know, I wish I had a solution, right? I wish it was that easy. I think the idea for us, at least, as people who clearly identify as, or at least others like to identify us as political filmmakers, I don't know what apolitical filmmakers are, but I think is that we try and raise questions. We try and throw open a debate in a societal framework, in a larger society. I don't think, and I think that irrespective of what the regime is, they will always be singing in the dark times, like Brecht said, right? You're not going to stop singing. There are crackdowns. It's becoming increasingly difficult to make films which are critical of the establishment, but people haven't stopped. A lot of independent work has continued. Many of us, I mean, you know, even Chal Chitra Abhiyan at a very hyper-local level, other than our sort of Vox Box, we're also doing a lot of short documentary films and so on, which are also critical of the state at a very hyper-local level also, you know, so it's happening everywhere. Yes, the reception that it gets, the fear that the filmmakers are working with has increased manyfold, but I think at one level, I think that for 65, 70 years, I think there's a lovely interview I was watching of Said Mirza Sahab after his second book was published. And in that interview, he said something very interesting when he was asked about how, you know, with the growing authoritarianism in the country and so on. And he says, you know, don't worry, the genie is out of the bottle. People are used to some kind of democracy in this country, and there's only so much you can thwart it. And I think that's playing out today. There was so much wisdom in what he said there. So as an artist, as a filmmaker, I'm not very worried about that. I am, of course, it's deeply concerning, but I'm also, maybe I'm just being a little too optimistic and painfully optimistic, but I think this is a sort of temporary situation, and it has also given rise to some incredible films, some incredible music, you know, the response to this kind of politics. So, ठीक है, मतलब.
So I had this conversation with Nandita Das, where I asked her the same thing, that, you know, isn't this great, all this repression, because like Iran, we'll get this really, really cool cinema. She said, Seema, we do not want good cinema at the cost of like dying people. So I'd rather have like poor cinema, but like a deeply democratic kind of country. So yeah, I mean, that whole connection between suppression and good art doesn't always hold, but I think Indians have kind of kept up some degree of subversion. And unfortunately, as somebody said, it's happened with people who have actually nothing to lose, because those who've had something to lose have set a very bad precedent. So I think here, particularly the Bombay film industry has a lot to answer for. So where, you know, Rasool Puguti says he's spot on, because it's people who don't have resources, who are just really struggling, who are making ends meet, who have their whole lives left ahead of them, who are doing the riskiest things possible. And I'm actually waiting that should there be a result which, rids us of the yoke of authoritarianism, either with a reformed BJP government or a non-BJP government which chooses to be better behaved and more democratic, you'll have those same forces coming in and making different kinds of films. So I'm waiting to see that. But yeah, there have been things. But as sorry. No, but just what Neruda says, like, rings true, right? That you can cut all the flowers, but you cannot stop the spring from coming. Exactly. So, yeah. Even though the elections are being held in anything but spring. Yes.
Yes, but
taking from what Nakul said, I think we can move into, Seema, what you wanted to talk about, which is like, who are the people who are raising these questions, who are carrying out certain debates? And, you know, some people have called this India's first YouTube election, moving on from previous WhatsApp elections. Now, you can agree or disagree with that sort of analysis, but we have seen the sort of explosion of a number of YouTube channels who are doing the job of trying to inform the public, what we would traditionally have thought the media would be doing, or the big media would be doing. We've also had people like comedians who have decided to take institutional measures to fight against what they see as authoritarianism.
Unfunny measures.
Yeah, exactly. Like we had Sham Rangila, who is trying to contest the elections. We have Kunal Kamra, who's gone to court against the IT rules. Seema, what do you think about this world that has
swirled? Yeah. So I used to always worry, just to not worry, but get puzzled as to why is a small organization being, even NewsClick is relatively small. It's not exactly, leading the marching public into a revolution here. Why are you attacking small filmmakers? It's actually now when you go down and speak to people, you realize why that's happening. Because there's such potency in the power of an idea or subversion or the power of an example. I remember ages ago, this is before the BJP government came, two girls had liked a Facebook post. That was when Facebook was big. And they were picked up, or some FIR, some action had happened. You're like, what's going on? Because it gives courage. Somebody stands up, Kunal Kamra gets up and says something, or he gets up and does something, puts out a film on farmers, as that wonderful trailer that you've put out. The Wire does something, Stroll does something, News Laundry does something. That cheek has tremendous kind of the human spirit, is a very surprising thing, and it has a capacity to break through many bottles, even if suppressed. So I think that's why they crack down. And why I say this, because when you speak to kind of ordinary people in completely remote areas, like when I went to a particular place and somebody completely unconnected said, no, I know the Wire, hum jante hain aapko, I know you, because you're the one jo aap sabko pani pilate hain. He was referring to an interview that Mr. Karan Thapar conducted in very fine English with Mr. Prashant Kishore speaking equally fine English in an English show. But somehow there is something in this very radical technology that has come in, which maybe even Google and YouTube don't understand so perfectly, but that disseminates down in ways that strikes a chord. So this whole desire to push people, or even say, take for instance Dhruv Rathi. Dhruv Rathi has recently gone rogue, if you like. He was earlier pretty much an establishment person. He would at best skirt around AAP kind of issues, but his dramatic kind of take on dictatorship, several other videos, almost instructionals like tutorials on democracy, they seem to have struck a chord. And it's not, I'm not talking Haryana.
He's issuing instructions.
Exactly, he's actually doing instructions and 100 crore and let's meet those targets. He's taking on the IT cell.
No, but आपका भी तो वो radical transformation आया है ना, तो वो आप ध्रुव राठी में तो देखेंगे.
But to find that, finding a resonance outside Haryana, Delhi, I would have thought culturally he's probably limited to that. He's not. It's everywhere. Ravish Kumar, of course, and Ravish is almost like the bedrock of that kind of journalism as a basis which has spawned many other small trees and fruits. But you clearly realize that, and I'm sure researchers and people will kind of go into this, but there is this whole dramatic explosion that's happened. And speaking of research, I'm sure our viewers know, but for those who don't know, Joyjeet Pal and a couple of others have actually done a study on how actually Godification of the media. So many Godi channels just being pushed into one corner. It's a law of physics. There will be no vacuum. The other side does get filled up by all sorts of other sundry actors. So that may be a problem because, the other side may be polarizing differently, so you kind of lose a center. But at least there will be, there will be music of the dark times. There'll be music of the darker times as well. And that has generated a competitive spirit of all kinds of subversion, which seems to be at play.
Very quickly adding to what Seema has said is that I think what's very interesting is that initially nobody understood the potential of social media the way the RSS and the BJP did. And there was a crazy proliferation. We've seen that.
Mover advantage.
Absolutely. Free data.
Yeah.
In 2013, in the 2013 riots of Muzaffarnagar and Shamli districts of West UP, we saw the role that social media had played in vitiating the atmosphere. In fact, I think this is the first time, I may be wrong and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is the first time that a riot of this scale was also, I'm not saying only facilitated, but also facilitated by social media in a very, right. Yeah. But as you but I think what has happened gradually is that, of course, there's an IT cell of Aam Aadmi Party has a crazily strong and very popular IT cell, a very efficient IT cell. So does the Congress now, and a lot of other opposition parties have their IT cells as well. But at the same time, there was a very organic and a very spontaneous anti-BJP IT cell that emerges as well, which is not funded by any political party. This is Janta IT cell. And there are a gazillion examples from people who are speaking, like Dhruv Rathi, who sort of speak of macro issues to very, very hyper-local channels and so on and so forth, who are actually at a very localized level denting what the propaganda of the BJP. Now, but I think, like you were saying, that what we're missing is a center. I think what we're also missing in the process is that a lot of the alternate has also been about looking into camera and giving gyan. It's been
yes, and also a lot of it has gone off the edge, but yes, that's another issue.
What is missing now on both sides is serious ground reporting, you know, and I think that vacuum needs to be filled in the coming years. It cannot just be about my gyan is better than your gyan.
Yeah, and actually I think Indian media is at a massive crossroads. And this whole thing about this mythology about vibrant Indian media, etc., that collapsed. And now we actually have, as you said, the absence of genuine, honest, deliberative, not that reporting was brilliant earlier, but there was some sense of averages you could take out of 100 reports that you read and say, okay, I'm factoring out a bit of paid news and all that. I'll get a general sense of what's going on and then use my own tools to arrive at conclusions. That's gone AWOL. That's disturbing.
Thank you. I think that sort of wraps up our election-related show for today. But I think it would be remiss to do a show this week and not talk about what's happening in Rafah. We've seen some really horrific images coming out in the last week of, you know, bodies that have been burnt, including of children. This is after, on May 24, the International Court of Justice told Israel to stop its offensive in Rafah, which is where people from across Gaza had actually taken shelter as a safe zone. The Netanyahu government has made clear that it's not going to abide by that ruling and has continued. Just on Sunday, 45 people were killed by the Israeli forces. In the few days after that, the total toll went up to 66. Across the world, there has been a lot of outrage over this. Even some of the countries who have been historically very close to Israel, like France, have said that, you know, this is too much and you need to stop. But there hasn't been any such statement from the Indian state. In fact, our Prime Minister, who in a recent interview claimed that during Ramzan, when there was a temporary ceasefire, it was because of him, hasn't had anything to say about this recent, very blatant genocidal evidence that we have seen. Instead, there was this big social media campaign of a lot of people posting about all eyes on Rafah, and Indian celebrities who posted that, who we can fault for other things like not speaking out about things happening in their own country, but who did choose to post on that, were quite viciously trolled by handles mostly without names and things, but very clearly supporters of the Hindu right, who claimed that these celebrities were being anti-Hindu by not speaking about Hindus in Pakistan. And this is just something I wanted to bring up as we wrap up this show as an important development that's taken place this week. And if you both have any closing comments on that.
I think it's a little bit of, I mean, the two sort of points that you made around what is happening in Rafah. One is the silence of the Indian state. We've seen, and one can't just blame the BJP for this. I think over the last few decades, we've seen a gradual cozying up of the Indian state with Israel, which is very disturbing. Yes, you did hear the right kind of noises being made, maybe when there was a Congress government, even sometimes during the BJP government, when there were attacks on innocent civilians in Palestine. But I think it's, but it's not like it ever, in any way, the Indian state ever began to change its trade policies with Israel or the imports of arms and ammunition within Israel. So, and we are one of the biggest importers of arms and ammunition from Israel.
Recently also exporters.
And exporters, exactly. So, I really feel that at the systemic level, we have the Indian state, which has a history, even during the years of the Cold War, of you know, taking this very important position of an anti-colonial stance and not being an ally of either the US or, you know, Soviet Union and the non-aligned movement. We've set examples globally. It's really sad that we've cowed down and become what we have. And I don't blame just the BJP for this. Yes, their positioning has been exponentially worse, but I think there is anti-Muslim sentiment and Islamophobia that's playing out in that. But I think there is a huge problem in the way we're positioning ourselves globally as a nation, and that is, and especially coming from a country that was the founders of, you know, at one level NAM and so on. So it is extremely distressing in that level. And for something like Rafah, you know, this is a crazy humanitarian crisis. How can you not respond to something? Who you're bombing a refugee camp, for heaven's sake? You know, so this is something that anyone should respond to. Even if you're pro-Israel, you've got to respond to something like this. This is just simply a humanitarian crisis. There is no way you can be silent on something like this, right? And to come to what you were saying about celebrities, Look, I mean, again, like if, for example, I agree with you that the Bombay film industry has been generally disappointing, and if you compare it to, say, during the farmers' movement, the Haryana, the Punjab film industry, the Punjabi film industry, or the Tamil film industry, or the Malayalam film industry, they've been it's been very encouraging to see the kind of responses that have come from the celebrities in those industries. Yes, during anti-CA movement, I think many of them did, the Bombay film industry developed some sort of a spine. And many of them also then extended their voice to the, some of them at least went and stood by the farmers movement. But I think the bigger question here is that yes, it's great that they're taking this position. Where trolling is concerned, look, it is a huge issue, right? But I think the problem has become that, I mean, journalists have been killed in the last 10 years. And I think this trolling is taking away too much of our attention. I'm not saying, I'm not justifying trolling. I'm not even saying that it's something that we should turn our, I mean, we should look away when this is happening. But, you know, people have been killed, people have been jailed on flimsy charges and are continuing to be in jail. I don't think we should focus all our energies on something like trolling. I mean, it's awful, it's obscene, it's sexist, it's misogynistic, it's very violent at one level, right? But yes, we need to talk about it, but let's not make that the central point of how, you know, how people are being affected by this government.
So what really disturbs me about India, Jahnavi and Nakul, right now, of course, all what you say apply, that, you know, this is not, policy didn't come about, but Mr. Modi's personalized diplomacy makes India the only significant democratic country which stands with Mr. Putin and with Bibi, whom he calls his personal friends. There are two massive wars in our region, whether it's Ukraine or this whole genocidal attack on Gaza. What has India done? We've not taken the lead on the global south. We can barely say China when our borders are under attack, you know. So forget about even being able to name Mr. Putin or to be able to call out Bibi. So India has, I think, kind of, we may call ourselves a global south chair, we're not. South Africa is much more. Other smaller countries are, you know. There are, what is our position on Rohingya refugees? What's our position on Myanmar? The absence of democracy. So I think this just highlights the horror situation that India finds itself in diplomatically, that you don't probably even matter beyond a point if you're not taking those positions in the face of a rising China. But the other twin thing that you said, I think these instances show up the extreme rot socially within, which is supported by the government of the day. It's not as if the rot didn't exist earlier, but it gets fused, it gets a power source from people in power. So whether it is feeling very happy about Nijar being killed, so you have trolls, etc., who otherwise have some government support expressing happiness, ghar ghar mein ghus ke mara, or turning this into an anti-Hindu thing. So it's good to kill Muslim children. Is that how it's going to be read out? So I think these are the very disturbing impact of a 10-year kind of regime which has glorified Islamophobia, jiski lathi usi ki bhais, whoever is strong gets to kind of call the day. I think these are very disturbing things. And also India on the world stage at a time when we're the world's greatest population, biggest, I mean, we have the largest population. We are saying that we are a democratic counter to China. I'd like to see some evidence on the ground for that, which has gone missing.
Sure. No, absolutely.
Okay, thank you both so much. I think we'll wrap up here for today and go into what promises to be a
super
very
duper finish.
eventful week. Yeah, thank you so much for watching.
Thank you so much.